for joining us today. I think before we begin today's session, it would be useful if you could both give us a short introduction about your institutions and the work that you're doing at the moment. Chris, I'm happy to hear from you first.
Thank you very much, Ashton. So hi all, my name's Chris Trace. I'm the Head of Digital Learning and working at the University of Surrey. So University of Surrey is a medium-sized institution. We've got around 16,000 undergraduate students, TEF Gold recently based in Guildford. We've got 3 different faculties covering a range of different subjects and very much pride ourselves on student experience, employability and excellent teaching and impactful research.
Thank you. And Stuart?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Stuart Watts. I'm Vice President for D2L's Europe, Middle East and Africa business. D2L is a private and founder-led Canadian business, and we provide a learning management system called Brightspace to higher education institutions all across the globe.
Thanks, both. The disruption of the past year has forced universities to adapt quickly, challenging existing orthodoxies and making innovations that seemed previously impossible suddenly inevitable. If universities are to deliver a premium learning experience, they must assess which changes are here to stay and prepare for an uncertain future. I'd like to begin today's discussion by asking which changes of the past year are here to stay and why they've been so successful. Chris, this must be something you've spent a great deal of time thinking about in recent months.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, almost all of my time, you could say. So I've been relatively new to my post. I started in September. And since I've started, it's been obviously a whirlwind since then. There's a load of stuff, load of positives that I think we can take. There's the huge silver lining, I guess, around the cloud that is COVID. It's for many people involved in technology-enhanced learning. I know on Twitter that might be a controversial term, but many involved in higher education and learning in general. This pandemic has been a catalyst for some great changes, obviously some really horrific times as well. But I think the surge we've seen in staff and student digital capabilities, the use of technology to solve problems has been a real eye-opener. Many institutions, including our own, have talked about enhancing education and changing things for the better. I think this has really given us a kickstart. So for me, I guess when I think about what we've achieved, a lot of it comes down to the increase in confidence. I don't think there's that many new tools. A lot of the tools we're using have been there for a long time, but staff and students now have the confidence to be able to do this. And I've realized it is possible. A phrase I also heard Lisa Roberts, the VC of Exeter, use this a few months ago, I think. There's been a bonfire of bureaucracy as well. And I loved the phrase. I think with an emergency, it's shown that changes need to be made. And I know we have, as many universities have, shifted very fast in terms of policy to be able to make some of these positive changes and make them stick.
Thank you. And sorry, Stuart, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to, I mean, I completely agree with what Chris had just said there. You know, two of the main points I would have made were, in terms of changes that are here to stay, academic upskilling has been one of those that we've made great strides in. You know, I've got numerous examples of universities up and down the UK and globally that have embarked on ambitious programs of upskilling for academics. And we've seen some real success stories off the back of that. So I think that focus on staff is definitely here to stay. I also agree with I've never heard the term bonfire of bureaucracy, but I would totally agree with that as well. You know, universities have had to become more agile. There is far less bureaucracy. They're making decisions much quicker. Akin to the corporate world, which I think is something that needed to happen and will be here to stay. There are also a number of other points that I would highlight here as well. So, obviously we've shifted to online. I think the increase in online delivery, the focus on the online experience is here to stay. In order for universities to remain competitive, to attract students, to grow student numbers, to reach more learners. I think that focus on the online experience, has to be has to remain as a key priority for institutions across the UK. I think greater use of technology to support campus-based learning as well. So there's been a lot of lessons learned in the last 12 months from the fully online approach that will be applied to campus sessions. So, something as simple as actually flipping the classroom and making sure that students have engaged with content and got their thoughts straight before they then attend an on-campus session. It makes best use of that face-to-face time on campus. I read a great article in the Guardian a couple of months ago, which was more focused on K-12, but I think you can apply it to higher ed as well, where it was saying that this shift to fully online has actually benefited a lot of students who are potentially a little bit slower on the uptake in face-to-face sessions, and they need that time to actually go away and study and get their thoughts together and process things before they're able to come to class and actually discuss these things in a productive way. So I think that things like that have definitely are definitely here to stay. Assessment is another one. I think there's been some great changes in the way that universities are looking at assessment, a shift to more formative-based assessment models, outcomes-based assessment as opposed to just final examinations. Block models have come to the fore as well, which have led to increases in success at a number of UK and I'm thinking about Australia as well with Victoria and what have you. So I think lots of changes that I think are here to stay in some guise.
Thanks, Stuart. You've raised a number of points that I'm really keen to touch on throughout the session. I'm interested to talk about, I think when we consider moving forward with a hybrid model of learning, sometimes we automatically revert to an idea that it's going to be the online learning we've been forced to do in the last year and the on-campus learning that we're used to. But actually, you mentioned that because we're now more open to these digital platforms and the new technology we've discovered, that really we can bring that into campus-based learning. And that seems like a perfect blend. So how do the both of you see, what does that look like for the cohorts to come?
I think, absolutely the shift towards online gives us a lot more flexibility as well. It's one of the great advantages, you mentioned, Stuart, if students sometimes prefer to go through content in their own time, and perhaps it takes them a little bit longer, they don't quite pick it all up first time. I certainly know many of my students were already trying to learn like this. So as a university, we've always in many areas been trying to do lecture capture as much as possible. And we'd already seen a shift from students stopping face-to-face attendance and really preferring to watch recordings as they were going through. They can stop and start a lecturer, which is much more polite doing it online than doing it in person. They tend to not like that. You can get a lecturer to repeat what they just said. Again, they don't really like doing that in person. I also know many students speed me up or slow me down, depending on what how fast I'm talking and how much time they have to listen to me. So that kind of flexibility of learning is brilliant. I also think there's the flexibility from a work point of view, from staff point of view. So for example, I've been on campus twice in the last year, and I'm still absolutely able to do my job. It's given us as staff the opportunity to fit work in, not having to do so much of a commute as well. So yeah, a lot of different advantages.
I would agree with that. I do think it's important though that we kind of flip that on its head a little bit. So of course technology can be used to better support education, but I think it's important that we consider that technology shouldn't change the academic integrity and the way that education is actually delivered. Technology is constantly evolving. There's always going to be vendors claiming that they're the next biggest thing, and that they're trying to force universities to do things in a certain way because that's the way that their technology kind of ensures it has to happen. But I do believe that technology should be led by pedagogy, and vendors have a responsibility to understand the pedagogical side of things and then build that technology to support that. And that really comes through flexibility in technology, I think. That said, online and hybrid, in particular, those forms of learning, of course, can be refined through technology to provide personalization, for example, and equity in education. Each learner can study at their own pace in their own way. And automation will mean that teachers still have time to coach online as well and give that sort of personalized experience. So yeah, a couple of points to raise there.
The personalization that you've brought up there, Stuart, I think is something, Chris, you've also touched on in terms of students learning at their own pace. Potentially one of the other benefits of digital platforms is that we can create data, we can assess data. I imagine that's something D2L is offering. And Chris, I don't know if that's something that you are engaging with. I think attendance is a fairly rudimentary piece of data that's not necessarily the most indicative of student success. So how else can we assess how well students are engaging and learning?
Absolutely. So whenever we start talking about learning analytics and this whole area, as things have become more digitized, we have more data. With great data comes great responsibility, I guess, bit of a Superman riff. And I think there's a lot of ways that you could plow into the data and start making judgments. I've had my fingers burned with this before when my first dabble with learning analytics, and I adopted a flipped classroom model in a module I was teaching on about 6-7 years ago. I'd be giving pre-learning content to students. I'd ask them to work through the activities, then come into class where I'd then run a workshop with them. And fairly early on, I realized I could be looking at which students had interacted with the content and which ones hadn't. I started talking to students about this data and showing them that we could track that, which had an increase in the number of students engaging with it because they suddenly felt I was looking over their shoulder. But I did notice a couple of students who hadn't engaged with the pre-learning content. Asked them to speak to me, quietly pulled them aside at the end of the class and had a chat about why that was. And it turns out they'd absolutely been watching the content. They'd been watching it with their housemate. So the only data we had was their housemate's data. And for me, that's always then given a slight warning that data does not equal what the student behavior is. You also, I guess, talked about the difference between attendance and engagement there. And I think what we try to measure is engagement, but what we often end up measuring is attendance or a click on something. Just because somebody's clicked on something does not mean that they've learned deeply from that they've interacted with it, they've thought about it, they've repurposed it, they've tried to apply it to their own world. And we are at a point where it's very difficult to track that, okay? What I find really exciting is that as we are starting to be able to track different kinds of data, I know it's been touched on already this week, there's ways that we can at least start to try to notice patterns within that data. Some of the ways I guess I would be very keen for us to use data more, and it is something we are starting to look more and more into as a university, is trying to spot trends, because with any data, I guess it's not about the individual data point, it's about the trend. And if I have a student that is routinely engaging in content, and be that online and face-to-face, but then for some reason, I notice a decline in their attendance, I guess as a caring academic, that should be a flag to me that potentially there's a pastoral concern here and we might want to go and talk to that student. I think at the moment we're probably not able to draw too much more from the data in terms of how we can predict performance of things. I think the science behind that is not there yet, but as we get more and more data and more power to analyze that, it might be that that's the kind of the bright future that data can give us.
Thanks, Chris. And Stuart, from your perspective as the vendor who's providing these sorts of analytics and insights, is there something that you think is can be really well used by universities? Is there some sort of analytics insights that you wish you could provide?
Well, so So analytics is one of the things that D2L has always focused heavily on. We've always been market leaders in this from a native LMS analytics perspective, partly because our heritage is in fully online learning as a business. So, and in a fully online world, obviously what's going on in the LMS is the learning platform. Students are doing all of their learning in there. So having the capability to sort of use that data effectively to answer questions around engagement is obviously absolutely key. I think from D2L's perspective, from a data standpoint, it's about providing flexibility. I speak to universities week in, week out, and they all have different ideas, different policies. They want to answer different questions about their data, and so whilst I do think it's important to provide some basic visualization to answer simple questions to help academics understand students that may be falling behind, and and in that instance, it's certainly not a stick. It's more of this is something that maybe you should look into a little bit deeper, have a conversation with the student about. We've noticed that you haven't been attending this class. We notice you haven't been spending much time in content, that type of thing. But ultimately for us, it's about providing the ultimate flexibility so a university can actually have a data strategy, which up until recently, it's been a bit of a buzz phrase rather than something that universities have actually done. Now universities are definitely thinking about data strategy a lot more seriously, and having the tools in an LMS to basically ask any question they want of their data is the key thing that we focus on. That said, Chris talked about trend spotting, and within our platform we do provide visualizations. They're D2L visualizations, right? I hasten to add. So they might not be for everybody, and universities might think something's of use and something isn't of use, but we are trying to help, because there's a lot of complex data that builds up in these platforms, and making sense of that data, producing visualizations that can be actioned by users is a difficult job. You need data analysts and data strategists to do these sorts of things. So we do focus on trying to give our institutions a head start. But I would caveat that by saying they're not for everybody. Ultimately, what we're trying to provide is the flexibility to cater for whatever the question is that you want to answer.
That's great. Thanks, Stuart.
Yeah.
We've had a question from the audience here that I think is something we haven't really covered yet. The question is, you both emphasize the human element of digital transformation, but what support has been most effective for guiding academic staff from a fairly low base, i.e. not innovators, to increase their confidence in digital and hybrid pedagogies?
Maybe Chris has got some examples from Surrey.
I do indeed, and so I mean, this is the pleasure, I guess, of my role now. I've joined a team and leading a team now where I have a fantastic bunch of human beings whose focus is to really transform the digital experience and the education that we can provide at the university. And absolutely, I guess the key audience for us to be able to do that through is by working with our academics. I think every academic is an individual. They'll all have different things that work for them. And I guess the blend that we take is that we try to provide opportunities for people to see what, case studies, I guess, of what's working, what's not working. We try to provide opportunities for upskilling, and sometimes that's synchronous workshops where we might go through stuff with a group of staff. A lot of asynchronous resource. We've created a bank of resource that staff can dip in and out of. It's also then, I guess, not quite the hand holding, but the consultancy and the support. So when they start trying to develop this, they have somebody they can turn to and have a conversation. We're really, really interested in trying to have those conversations early. I'd rather have a conversation about what are you trying to achieve, and then help you think about ways that you might be able to achieve that, instead of, I'm trying to use this tool, can you tell me how to press this button? By then, I guess it's a little bit late. So I guess it's a whole heap of things that you need to do. For me, it's a lot about establishing the rapport and letting the staff know that we are here. Most universities now have an equivalent kind of digital education team, something like that, where there will be some resource out there for staff to gain the confidence and the competence in doing what they need to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, Ashton. I mean, we've seen multiple examples over the last 12 months of universities doing this really, really well. In comparison to what I'll sort of term it as CPD for staff, but most of it has been focused on upskilling with digital tools and teaching online, and obviously the online pedagogy is completely different to the sort of campus face-to-face based learning modalities. So there's been an awful lot of great examples. I automatically think of Teesside University as one example. They've done a fantastic job upskilling their staff, getting them certified on Microsoft tools. They've done it in such a way that their staff are promoting their micro credentials and learning when they've done this as well. So it's almost applying the similar sorts of pedagogy that you might to the students in the staff for the staff side of things. But yeah, loads and loads of good examples, and this is one of those things that I said is definitely should be here to stay, because I think we've come a long way where that's concerned.
You mentioned micro credentials there, Stuart, and I think that's something that would be interesting to touch on here. It is a growing aspect of the education system, and I think in terms of encouraging lifelong learning, micro credentials and upskilling, which you've also both mentioned, is going to be a fairly central aspect of that. So why do you think this has suddenly become such a popular way to learn, and especially in terms of that lifelong learning that I mentioned?
I can take that first if you like, Stuart.
Yeah, sure. No, you kick us off, Chris, and I'll
so
come in,
we're both too polite. So yeah, I guess this goes back to my point around flexibility, and one of the, as I said, the great advantages I feel of what's happened is everyone has largely, government advice, work from home if you can, and it's shown that actually a lot of people are able to do that. There's a lot of roles where there might have been some presenteeism before. We've shown that there are better ways of working. So that's, I guess, opened up the opportunities and people's minds that, although we don't all want to be sat on a screen all day, which I know a lot of us are currently, it is possible to do that. I guess coupled with that, there's also been obviously a lot of unemployment, a lot of job losses and things. So there's been a supply and demand opportunities, really. A lot of people looking for ways to upskill, demonstrate what they can do. And I think increasingly there's an awareness that there are these flexible ways of teaching yourself. You no longer have to take a couple of years out or take a few months out to go and do something. You can take some courses fitting into MOOCs, doing some micro credentials online. It really gives you that flexibility to fit learning in around the rest of your life instead of putting your life on hold, which I think is a great thing to be celebrated.
Yeah, I agree. Again, we're speaking to numerous universities that are looking more seriously at how they can effectively use micro credentialing. Even we're hearing of nascent countrywide schemes for micro credentialing shared across universities, which will allow students to essentially dip in and dip out of different universities, a kind of extension of interdisciplinary study, if you will. I think it's an opportunity for universities as well. As Chris said, the world of work is looking for effective ways to reskill, upskill their staff whilst they are doing a full-time job. And a micro credential is, a nice way of them being able to, and the opportunity for the university here is obviously they provide the courses and the learning for the staff at the corporate organizations, but also for the full-time students as well. It's a nice way of breaking down learning into bite-sized chunks, giving positive reinforcement along the way to let them know that they're on the right track. You can bring in gamification and leaderboards to these things as well to create competition, healthy competition amongst students. So, and ultimately, it's obviously going to be a way for all of us to share our expertise in a way that's recognized ultimately by employers. So lots and lots of positives from micro-credentialing, I think, and we're certainly going to hear more and more about it over the next couple of years.
Thanks, Stuart. I have another question here from the audience. I see very little discussion about asynchronous learning. We focus on the use of platforms and live sessions. How can we help colleagues to design meaningful asynchronous learning and group challenges beyond go on the forum and watch this video before class?
Fantastic question. So I guess for me, education comes down to what we're expecting the learner to be doing, and how we expect them to be building that level of knowledge. And there's lots and lots of different ways that asynchronous can be done. Obviously, you've got kind of the information transmission model where we can replace a lecture with a recorded lecture. But effectively, the student is probably doing something pretty similar to what they might have been doing. They'll be sat watching the lecturer, hopefully thinking about what the lecturer is saying, maybe even making some notes or organizing the thoughts themselves. There's a load of other ways we can provide opportunities. And if we can give students active things for them to be doing instead of read this book chapter, instead of doing this, I really like the idea of providing challenges to students so that they are trying to work their way up blooms, I guess. So build their knowledge, their understanding, and then start to apply the knowledge they've found towards scenarios. I think asynchronous stuff you can do maybe means asynchronous in terms of with face-to-face time to the lecturer, but you could also have team-based asynchronous activities where you might have a group of students trying to create a product or trying to solve a challenge. They can all chip into that in their own time and build that over time. And that's also a really great opportunity to bring in employability skills. So being able to manage your workload, work together on solving big challenges, documenting what you learn, that to me sounds a little bit like what I do in my day-to-day job every day, and can only be a great opportunity for students to build their understanding, deepen their learning, and also develop these skills, I said.
Thank you. We've got about 2 minutes to go here, and I think Chris has just mentioned the employability aspect of, all of these digital skills that students are learning. So Stuart, I'd really like to go to you just to finish us up here. What do you think about how employability skills are being taught to students over these sorts of digital platforms?
Well, I think it's getting better. I think there's a lot more collaboration between industry and education, more so than ever. And we're starting to see businesses move onto campuses, and that sort of thing is going to increase. I think technology is starting to play a bigger part in this as well. So certainly I can talk from D2L's perspective. We're looking at technologies that support the development of soft skills, for example. So the ability for students to record themselves doing a presentation and then analyze their performance automatically. So give them feedback about the filler words and to polish their communication skills and things like that. We're working on collaborative technologies to allow modes of learning that are prevalent today, like project-based learning and active learning, and all these collaborative modes and student-led modes of learning to facilitate those sorts of learning, which are going to help students gain the sorts of collaboration skills that they need when they move into the world of work, where everything is project-based and interdisciplinary. Interdisciplinary study is another example of that, and we've worked hard to support that within our platform over the last sort of 12-18 months as well. So I think we're getting there. I think there's going to be more and more collaboration between industry and education, even in curriculum design and things like that, to make sure that these sorts of digital and soft skills and engineering skills that are required in the world of work are being properly built in.
Thank you, Stuart. That brings us almost perfectly to the end of our session. So it will be on demand shortly, and THU will be in touch after the event about our key findings from Digital Universities Week. But for now, I would just like to thank you both again for joining us today and for raising some really interesting points. So thank you and goodbye.
Thanks,
Thank you for
Chris.
having
Thanks,
us.
Ashton.